everyone, and welcome to the Passionate Workforce Podcast, the show that explores how leaders can build organizations where people love what they do and are inspired to give their best every day. I am your host, Nicholas Capman, President and CEO of the FDA Group and author of the #1 bestseller, The Passionate Workforce. In this podcast, we dive into real-world conversations with leaders, thinkers, and change makers who are shaping the future of work. So let's get started. So today we are going to be talking about how do life experiences shape a leader long before anyone calls them a leader. And on as my guest today to discuss this topic is Jessica Smith. Hey Jessica, how are you?
Hello. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you very much for joining. So before we jump into the topic and some of the questions around it, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, Jessica Smith. Actually, I'm recently retired in April of this year. My most recent role was Corporate Vice President for Global Quality and Chief Regulatory Officer for a mid-sized medtech company based out of New Jersey. I spent probably over 25 years in the medtech healthcare industry. My background is I have a PhD in bioengineering, an undergrad in civil engineering, and most people don't realize that when somebody loves to write and they're an engineer, that you combine those together and you get regulatory affairs. So I spent many of my years very passionate about regulatory affairs, also quality, which I ended up leading a quality organization much later in my career. But prior to that, what a lot of people know about me, but some people don't, which is I was an athlete for 17 years of my life and was a full scholarship athlete in college, part of one of the captains of a Division I NC2A national championship gymnastics team and a two-time All-American. And I bring that up, one, because obviously I'm very proud of those accomplishments, but they really did shape a lot of my leadership style, and the things that I took away from being an athlete really shaped the way that I lead and form some of my good and bad ways of leading, as well as my life experiences. And I think while I am very proud of those things, and those are the things I generally talk about in an interview, those are the things that go on my resume. What's even more important are the things that shaped how I lead, the way I think, the way I respond to things, and kind of that intentional leadership that comes from those life experiences.
Mm.
And so today, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to share some of my journey and provide some anecdotes that hopefully will encourage others, the people that are listening, to reflect on their own experiences and how they have shaped them as leaders and how they can shape them to come, regardless of whether they have a title of leader or not.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? So, what were some early life experiences that taught you about leadership and resilience um, early on?
Great question. And it's obviously very fitting to the topic. And from my perspective, and I think there's a lot of people that have, what you call adverse childhood experiences. I think it's pretty much impossible to go through life without having something negative happen to you. And as a child, right, you're also often the recipient without having a lot of control over what is happening to you or in the environment you're in. For me
Mm.
personally, I had dozens of adverse childhood experiences, one of which I talk about a lot, which is by the time I was 17, when I went off to college, I had moved, and it depends on how I count them, 14 to 15 times.
Wow.
I was in a home. My parents were divorced when I was relatively young, and my mother was really never prepared to enter the workforce. And so there was a lot of kind of minimum wage jobs. There was a lot of mental illness that I was surrounded by. And as a result, we had food insecurity, we had housing insecurity, we had financial insecurity. And oftentimes we were moving into relatives' homes, mainly my grandparents. And that moving around did a few things.
Mm.
Because a child, you don't have a choice, right? You have to essentially go where your parents, or in this case, my mother, was taking us. And you develop thick skin. You develop the ability to adapt to change constantly,
Mm,
and you kind of adapt to or develop an understanding that some things are really just out of your control, and
mm,
it's how you respond to them, which is really what makes you thrive or become a victim. And I think because I had so many changes that were occurring in my early years, in my formative years, you really have to find ways to navigate through them without becoming a victim. And I think that was really critical to my building of resilience, but also it forces you to become independent and self-reliant long before you reach adulthood. Because of my mother's situation and some of the mental illness that was kind of going on in my life in terms of the people that were surrounding me, you have to actually take over adult um, activities
mhm,
long before you would otherwise. You have to kind of manage financially. You have to, in my case, in my athletic career, my mother was incapable of taking me to practice.
mhm,
So I had to find creative ways to get there on my own, or I had to stop. And so I could have stopped because it was too difficult, but I chose to find ways to essentially become resilient and not only bounce back, but kind of bounce forward. And if you look into the research, right, there's a lot of talk about this anti-fragility concept. And I think that's really the key. It's not just kind of bouncing back to status quo, it's finding ways to thrive. But all of those experiences really taught me resilience in a way of moving forward as opposed to just dealing with, right? So I'll stop there. And I think those are really some of the main experiences that taught me resilience.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch, and thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable. There was a bunch of thoughts that were going through my head. One is, which I heard recently, is the analogy of a mountain. When you're on top of the mountain, it gives you a lot of good perspective, but if you're going to grow as an individual, it starts in the bottom,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah,
the mountain
absolutely.
doesn't grow from the top up, it grows from the
Right.
bottom up, and the bottom is representative of the valley and the struggles that we go through.
Yeah.
And I'm a man of faith, and we say, God can move mountains. He also puts mountains there to move you. But then when we think about the concept of struggle, it's a really opportune time because who are the best people to help people that are struggling? People that have gone through the same struggles,
Right.
right? And the last thing I'll just say, which is how important mindset is, because just like there are good people that are poor and bad people that are poor, there are good people that are rich and there are bad people that are rich. Um, there are people that learn to be resilient and thrive in the most difficult of situations, and there are people that learn how to be resilient and thrive in the easiest of situations. And so you could be in a very privileged place and have a successful mindset that allows you to thrive or not.
Right.
And similarly, those that are in very difficult circumstances have to make that same decision, whether they're going to choose a mindset of not being a victim and saying, this is my normal, right? Which is interesting how no matter what your experience was as a child, that was normal.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think about my life and some of the challenges that I've had, and I like to say everybody could write a book, right,
Yeah.
about their life. But how do you deal with your normal, and are you
Mhm.
going to take control over it and say, okay, here's what I can control, here's what I can't control, so let's focus my time and energy here, or here's what I can control, and this is what I can't control, so I might as well just give up.
Right. Right. Exactly. I think that's actually very well said.
hmm who influenced, so kind of speaking to that mindset, right? I don't think we're naturally born with it. I think some people just are,
Hmm.
but I think one of the keys to being able to have a resilient mindset and the ability to get through struggles, it's because somebody influenced us. oftentimes from an early age. So, can you talk about some of those influences that you had the privilege of experiencing?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a kid, when as you're growing up, you don't realize you're being influenced by the people around you.
Mm,
It's just kind of happening. And I think
mm,
naturally you accept things that you appreciate and kind of gravitate toward. Either it's a personality or something they do. And there are people and situations that you decide you want to reject. And I don't think you consciously are doing it, but it's kind of happening as you're growing up. And for me, because I was an athlete, and had the opportunity to continue, even given when my parents couldn't afford to send me, um, nor did they have the ability to drive me. I had a community around me that supported me and kind of helped me continue, regardless of the fact that I didn't have the support necessarily from my family. And so I would say the community around me definitely influenced me at the time, not realizing it. But now, one of the main things that I do is I like to give back.
mm,
And I give back to various organizations. And I think it came from the families that helped me get
mm-hmm,
through difficult situations when they didn't have to. But I would say, my family, even though there was a lot of challenges, there were difficult situations. We were constantly moving. There wasn't necessarily a lot of support. I always felt loved.
mm,
And I also they were also very eclectic. My grandfather, interestingly, was an inventor, and we spent a lot of time living with them.
mm.
And he had a very interesting personality.
As
And
most inventors do.
yes, exactly. But he really taught me to be curious, to think out of the box. Interestingly, I went into regulatory affairs, which, obviously is very driven by rules and those sort of things. But I
Mm,
grew up in a very eclectic home, where there was a lot of love, but it was the more different and the more interesting and the more curious you could be, that was what was celebrated. And so I learned that thinking out of the box was something that you should celebrate.
mm,
Having people that, as friends, and, your community around you, that were willing to do things differently, be brave, even when something hasn't been done before. That was something I learned from them. And then obviously my coaches. I had the privilege most of my years, my formative years, when I was training 5, 6 days a week, spending more time with my coaches than my family by a long shot. Um, I had a coach that found that was really how do I say this? He was very humorous. We
mm-hmm,
had a lot of humor in our lives, and he spent a lot of time trying to get us to laugh. So
mm,
you're training, you're either injured or you're scared or you're
mm,
tired or things like that, and we always had a way to kind of take a break and find humor and do something that was fun for all of us, during times that were very challenging. And so even in my professional career, I found that bringing humor, and trying to kind of lighten the mood, even when you're dealing with warning letters or you're dealing with compliance, things that are very serious, um, finding a way to have some humor and lighten the mood a little bit and kind of step back and realize, take a breath, we're all in this together, and use humor as a way to move forward. And I would say kind of the fun, in your jobs. And when I get to college,
mm,
I had a coach that also influenced me a lot. He was one of the most successful women's collegiate athletic coaches in the country, and he did things interesting in an interesting way, good and bad. But one of the things he did is we would go into our meetings before our season would start, during our season, and then after our season, and he would ask us, "What is your plan? What is your plan to help this team succeed?" And we would have a plan that we would give him. And whether it was the skills we were going to learn,
mm,
the grades we were going to get, how we were going to get through school, what
mm,
that plan was, all the way to how we were going to support the team to get us to another championship. And he held us to that. Certainly he had input, but it kind of changes the psychology when he's asking you as opposed to him
dictating.
telling us. Exactly. And so it changes that dynamic. And I use that a lot, but I also use what it really is personal accountability.
Right.
And if you talk to anybody that's been on my teams, they will know, or they will probably say that I'm very big on personal accountability. If you say you're going to do something, you better do it. And if you're not going to do it, that's fine, but you need to be very clear before it doesn't happen, why it didn't happen and what the new plan is. And it
Mm,
and it really does change that psychology. But I did learn that from him, and learned that personal accountability is critically important to success.
hmm So on that, there's a book by Jocko Willink called Extreme Ownership.
Hmm.
It's one of my top five. One of the things that's nice about it, it's very entertaining. So
Yeah.
he was a Navy SEAL, and so I think he has like six principles, and
Hmm.
every principle starts with the war story, right? So chapter five, right? And it's there were bullets flying over our head and there was nowhere to go. So you're like, oh
Right,
my
right,
God, what's
right.
happening? And then he gets through whatever that moment was, and there was some sort of leadership moment that he then applies to the business world. So what did I learn in war, and how does that apply in the
Mhm.
business world? And then lastly, he kind of recounts that principle.
Yeah,
So each principle, it's very entertaining. Um, but it really is empowering.
yeah,
It's funny because once you find out you're responsible for everything,
yeah,
it sounds like a prison, but it's actually very freeing,
yeah.
right? Because wait, I'm responsible for everything? Oh, so I do have control.
Right, right.
Right, right. And one of the things that I've said to take, to be hyperbolic about his book is, if my wife were to go and get robbed at CVS today, right? That's my fault. Right? Well, how could that be your fault? Well, if I was being thoughtful and mindful, I would say, okay, which CVS are you going to? When are you going? What's the time? Is it a good
Right,
area? Are you protected? Do you have a buddy? Or what, and that doesn't mean like right now she can go to my local town CVS. The likelihood she's going to get robbed is non-existent, right?
right,
So so
right.
so that means I have to react in a
Yeah,
manner that's that's equal to that level of risk,
yeah.
right? Now if we were somewhere else, like actually is today Monday? Yeah, it is.
Yep.
So Saturday night we got back from Brazil, and we spent a month there. And
Oh, nice.
so how you behave in Brazil, depending on what part of Brazil you're in, you have to, adjust to whatever that level of risk is,
Right,
right?
right. Absolutely.
Um, then I was thinking about your comment about out of the box thinking. Well, you can't think out of the box unless there is a box, and those are the rules and regulations,
Yeah,
right? So you're
exactly.
almost forced to think
Yeah,
outside of the box when there's a box created.
yep.
I liked your comment about humor, and I think it gives a lot of perspective.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when we get involved in a very difficult situation, it's almost as if our eyes physically narrow
Yeah,
and you have no periphery,
right.
right? I had a very challenging situation once, and I'm not going to get into the details, but I spoke to a confidant, and the confidant started laughing. Now, I could have taken that a couple different ways, right? But um, he wasn't laughing because it wasn't a very serious situation. He was laughing because deep within that challenge was an opportunity.
Right.
And I remember how I was fortunate enough to have a perfect reaction, which was his laughing made me realize, oh, not that it's not serious, but
Right.
wait, I can handle this.
Yeah,
Because if I
yeah.
couldn't handle it, you wouldn't be laughing right
Right,
now.
right,
So your laughing is telling me that you have confidence that I can
right.
handle this.
Yeah. It kind
So
of changes the perspective, kind of it resets.
Mm.
the way you think about something, I think, and allows you to I think kind of what you were saying is instead of being narrow, it kind of opens you up to wait a sec. There's
Mm.
more to this, and I can think about it a little differently.
Yeah. Before I jump into the next topic, there was it's just an interesting thing that popped in my head. So I don't watch Joe Rogan as much as I did maybe several years ago, but I used to watch his podcast and then realized I can't do 3 hours of a podcast. But one of the things that he said that really kind of stuck out to me is the worst part of your life is the worst part of your life.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
but what in this particular example, what he was referring to is people that don't have difficult lives compared to other people. But yet everybody has to have the worst moment of their life. So there's a couple different ways to kind of look at that, which is you and me might look at something that somebody says this is the worst moment of my life and be like, you've got to be kidding. But if we actually think about the fact that our body has to attribute the worst part of our life to some moment, that is the worst part of their life, which is going to
Right,
be equal
right.
to the feelings we went through in the worst moment of our life.
Yeah,
Almost, right? Not
yeah, yeah,
exactly, but you know what I mean?
yeah, I do.
So that's what's kind of leading me into my next question for you, which is in order for us to grow as leaders, in order for us to be resilient, we have to go through failures, disappointments, adversity, so on and so forth. So can you kind of speak to those moments as you were developing as a leader?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack with my early years. But if I just look at failure, right? I think I really like that point of the worst part of your life is the worst part of your life. It's relative. Everybody's got that relative point, but the
Right.
reality is something that may not seem that bad could be just as bad to that person as something,
Right.
horrific to somebody else. So it's interesting. And I think from failure perspective, if you think about athletics and gymnastics is something, if you just think about the balance beam.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I did gymnastics for 17 years. Arguably every single day that I was in a gym, probably eighth grade through high school, I was already 6 days a week, 4 to 5 to 6 hours a day, training. So you're always on a balance beam. You fall off that balance beam hundreds of thousands of times. So over the years, and in any given day, it's dozens, right?
Mm.
And you could call those failures every single day. So if there's any one of
Mm.
those times I decided I'm not getting back on that beam, I would not be sitting here in front of you.
Mm.
Any single one of those times. So you learn in a very kind of micro environment the concept, which is certainly not unique to this
Mm.
conversation, but of getting up one more time than you've fallen off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're learning that and you're watching it happen as your body adjusts, your mind adapts, because really what it's doing is it's teaching you every single possible thing that could go wrong and how to adjust for them. And so the repetition, that's what it's doing. So failure from that perspective, was happening constantly, but you're also failing just in, competitions every single weekend almost, in the gym, you're competing with your teammates without really realizing it, not in a
Mm.
formal setting. But then you also have the formal, competitions when you're actually competing. You fail all the time. I can tell you, I lost way more times than I won something. And so you kind of learn that without realizing it constantly.
Mm.
Adversity, my childhood, again, lots of things that are out of your control, and you learn that you can only control certain things, right? Um, so I had adversity growing up, the things that I mentioned. Um, I had adversity. My own marriage failed. My husband actually moved to China and didn't return.
Mm.
And so I kind of didn't have much of a choice. And I had a choice, but there was one choice that was obvious to me. But it left me as a single parent as
Mm.
well. And I also lost my daughter.
Mm.
So that piece of it, um, to put a pause on that and reflect, is adversity that you can't even imagine. experiencing and having to overcome.
Mm,
Um, and so, adversity has been ever present in my life, and currently is something that I have to manage every single day. The disappointment piece of life, really is something I look at as you have an expectation of the way things are supposed to be, and they don't happen that way.
mm,
And I think it really builds empathy, and acceptance. And for me personally, when I talk about, for example, I had a lot of things happen, but then of course losing my daughter provides me a lot more of a deepened ability or greater ability to empathize with people in a work or professional setting.
mm,
I used to kind of skim over life experiences because we're at work. And now I realize
mm,
people bring those things to work.
mm,
And we have to be able to, one, understand them, accept them, empathize with them, and give people the space to work through them
mm,
and not, I guess, criticize or provide or give unreasonable expectations. I think it's given me, and created in me more empathy to just allowing, that concept that we all talk about of work-life balance.
mm,
It's real, right? And allowing people time to grieve, time to manage their own lives and situations. Because the reality is, if you give that and they take a little extra time that maybe you didn't really count on or build into a schedule or whatever, they're going to come back stronger.
mm,
They're going to come back and they're going to trust you more. And they're going to come back and work harder because they know that you gave them that time. And
mm.
so, having gone through just the most unimaginable tragedies in my own life has given me, I think, a lot more understanding for others,
Mm.
and what other people have gone through as well.
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch I want to go through. One is just I'll go back to what I said earlier, which is who's the, most fit to be able to help somebody struggling is somebody that went through that same struggle, right?
Exactly.
And, and I wrote down everything, so I'm just going to go in order. Like, I go through, several weeks of going to the gym, and then I go through several weeks of not going to the gym, and my son likes to, kind of poke me
Yes.
and, and say,
Sure.
you're not good with that. And I go, you're wrong. I'm actually very good at it because I always go back.
Yeah.
You know, I always go back. I always go back. I also well, I'll say one of the learning moments I had, and this is vulgar, but it's, why sugarcoat it? In seventh grade, I lost all my friends, and I remember, yeah, and I remember talking to my father, and I was like, nobody likes me, and this was not like a typical child, nobody likes me. This was actually nobody liked me, and my father said, he goes, you know why? And I said, why? He goes, because you're an asshole. And I'll tell you, in that moment, that was exactly what I needed to hear. Now, to kind of unpack it, really what was happening was if I thought something was funny, then it was funny and I would do it,
Right.
right? So one of the things I taught my kids as they were growing up is the difference between playing and teasing is how the other person feels.
Yes, exactly.
Because you could be doing X with that person for 5 minutes and it's playing, but then they don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
And now you have to stop, or you have just crossed in teasing, even though you were doing all the same stuff and it was acceptable. Is
Mhm.
that's the difference between playing and teasing. Um, in terms of overcoming adversity, I did try to surf while I was in Brazil. Emphasis on the try. So I ended up buying a boogie board, and so I think that one's a better
Nice.
fit for me. My daughter was much more successful than me. But interestingly, I wrote that down, the surf thing before you talked about your personal loss. And so there was a world-renowned surfer named Sean Thompson,
Mhm.
out of South Africa. Do you know this person?
I don't.
Okay. And he was like gold medalist and all this
Mhm.
stuff. He had a brand, and he, similar to you, he lost a child. So in South Africa, they would at this period of time, which I think was the 80s,
Mhm.
there was a game where you would everybody went to school with a tie, the
Mhm.
boys,
Yeah.
and you would strangle somebody with a tie, which I think was hazing or kind of the way you'd pick on people or something. It wasn't like, but this particular incident didn't work out for his son, and
Wow.
he died from being strangled with his tie. And so kind of actually, I was talking to my daughter about this while we were in Brazil, which is when we try to understand um, why some people can't handle adversity and why others can, right? Like you see, there's like this dance group in Africa or in Ghana or something, and there's these little boys, and they're all over the internet, and they're doing dance. They're actually on with Shakira
Mhm.
during the World Cup, right? So
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, I
Yeah.
was like, wait a second, are those Yeah, they are. And they're loving life, right? And they don't have a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you see somebody fall from grace and they commit suicide. And I think really what it is, it's not what do you lack. I think it's how far have you fallen. So if you don't have a lot to lose, then there's not very far to fall. And I think that would kind of have an impact on your personal perception of that loss. Whereas if you have everything,
Yeah.
that could either be materially or it could be emotionally,
Hmm.
and you lose it all,
Yeah.
how far have you fallen?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that can really impact people and their ability to overcome adversity.
Yeah. It reminded me of something, where, growing up, my mother did a lot of jobs that, were not, you know, probably the most ideal jobs. There were a lot of minimum wage jobs, and she would also elicit us to help her a lot. So I've
Mm,
cleaned a lot of houses, I've cleaned swimming pools, I've cleaned laundromats, I've cleaned, there were a lot of things that she would ask us to help her do. And I think it teaches you to be humble. So that it made me think of this when you think about the falling piece. I actually at one point got laid off from a job. Um, and that's I won't get into all the details of it. And I thought, wait, what? You kind of look around, go, wait, what just happened? And I got home and I thought, well, that's interesting. That just opened up all these other doors for me
mm,
that I had not thought about doing. And within a day, I had called a friend and I said, she was actually working for the state of Utah. In one of the government offices and doing a lot of STEM programs for children. I thought, God, I always wanted to do it. And I called her up and I said, can I be an intern? Can I
mm,
just help you? And
mm,
immediately, so I think because I'd grown up, I do think that had something to do with it because I wasn't afraid to
mm,
be an intern. I wasn't afraid to do things that might have seemed, many, many levels below
mm,
where I was and things. I was just like, wow, all of a sudden, all these opportunities became apparent. And I think kind of that point of how far do you fall, I think if you change your mindset, which you brought up at the initial part of what does this mean? And again, it's not unique to say one door closes and other doors open, but you have to be open to looking and seeing what's in those other doors because if you're not, you never have those opportunities. And I think it's a really critical piece of resilience and resiliency and leadership style and helping teams move forward when adverse things happen.
mm. Yeah, there are several. I remember there were like these. Now, I hate to say this, but it's true. There were three really bad things that happened to me. I can't remember what two of them were. I just remember there were three. I remember one of them, which was I was applying for student teaching because I went to school to be a high school history teacher.
Oh,
And a week before I was supposed to start, the teacher said, "No, we
oh
can't
wow.
have you." And I remember being like, "Well, there's no time. Like, what am I gonna do? I just
Right.
went to college for this, and now I'm screwed." Um, I ended up getting into a different place with this other person, and it was just such a great experience. And that was very synonymous to the other two things that happened, which for whatever reason I can't remember. I've said this story before, but um, I think one of the things that we and you said this without saying this is look for the opportunity in the tragedy. Some are easier to see the opportunity than others, but like a layoff, what did that just create? If you think about entrepreneurs, a lot of times it's a result of being laid off, right? Or like my soccer injuries, that gave me a great opportunity to get better at golf.
Mhm.
So
Exactly. Exactly.
and there's obviously a big spectrum of things that you can look at and say, what's the opportunity here versus others? But I think there is that opportunity for us to say, hey, what opportunity is here? And actually, let me kind of jump into my next question for
Yeah.
you, which is a lot of times these opportunities that present themselves are unexpected. So what experiences pop in your head where something unexpected happened that turned into a leadership lesson?
Yeah, there's one experience that I think I've talked about in different forums and settings when I've talked about kind of my journey, and it's hard to kind of imagine, but so when I went to the University of Utah, gymnastics was first and foremost in my mind. It was the best program in the country. I was incredibly privileged to have the opportunity to go and compete on such a high caliber team, high caliber people, program, the whole thing. And they had the most national championships of any program in the country when I went. My sophomore year, we got fifth. Um, and it may not seem like a big deal, but when you are the most winningest program with every expectation that you're going to be in the top two, because the year before we actually had gotten second, which is also disappointing in a way, but we got fifth and it was horrible. I mean, it was devastating. It was, and because of the program and what it was, what it is in Utah, even to this day, the press got involved, right? Utah's never going to win again. They're never going to, come back and that sort of thing. And I remember not every single instance, but I remember the feeling of that year. One of the key things that happened was, and I think this is really important and it often is lacking in professional settings, is we owned our loss. We owned it. We accepted it. We took accountability for it. And when you do that, all of a sudden the solutions are for that problem, right? Because so often in a professional setting, people kind of dance around what the real issue is. And when you do that, you find solutions that really don't fix the real issue. you
Mm,
you know what I mean? So you kind of are constantly dancing around what the real problem could be. And so in this case, we own the problem. We own the fact that we got fifth. We own the fact that we screwed up. We owned our own accountability. And even the people that didn't compete, because when you have a team, not to go into all the details, not everybody competes, but they are key parts of the team because they could compete if somebody else got injured or whatever, but they have a role to play in supporting everybody else in what they're doing. And so we came together as a team and we decided we're going to ignore what everybody else is saying.
mm,
We're going to come together, and it doesn't mean that we loved each other and that we were best friends and that we hung out together, but it did mean that we were all on the same page with regard to what our end goal was, and we were going to do everything we could to help each other get to that end goal.
mm,
And we were going to fix the issue that we identified occurred. And our coaches were even on the same page. They came in and said, we screwed up. We won the next year.
mm,
And that was probably because we'd gotten fifth and then we won, was probably made it even more sweet in that
hmm.
we came back from that and
Well,
we
it's the
proved
opposite of
everybody
what I
wrong.
said. How far is the fall or how high is the climb?
Exactly.
And
And
over what period of time?
yeah, exactly. And I think that it taught me a lot of things in a professional setting, right? How many companies get a warning letter and they think that, the sky is falling and you're never going to get out and stuff. It's like, no, this is a blip. We absolutely are going to get out of this and we're going to find a path. It also teaches you that it's a little bit like jumping off a cliff, right? Where, people don't think you're going to do it. You're going to try to do things differently, but you really don't know for sure if you're going to succeed or what that end is going to look like. You know where you want to be, but you have to try things that maybe you haven't tried before. You have to be brave.
Mm.
And it taught me that in ways that I didn't realize until much later. Actually, when I got laid off from my job, I had actually planned to go back to school to finish my PhD after a 10-year break. And at this point, I'm a single parent. I am the sole source of income for my raising my daughter. Um, and I jumped off a cliff because I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. I didn't know if I was going to succeed. And the consequences could have been quite large. But I used the strength that I gained from a lot of different things, but one that was pretty key was that experience of getting fit and finding a way to succeed is having trust in myself. Um, and so I think that those experiences really taught me how to be a leader, but also be a brave leader.
Mm.
When you don't know that the path you're on is actually the right path, but you feel that you're confident enough to lead people down the path and know that you can make adjustments if you need to and find a solution and be successful. I think those experiences really taught me how to be brave in those sorts of situations.
Mm. See, I want to hone in on the word brave because I borrowed this from someone else and it was really, really great saying. And for parents, I want them to hear this, right? Is when your child says that they're scared, right? I don't want to do it, I'm scared. Say, well, you can't be brave unless you're scared.
Right, exactly.
You know, how
Exactly.
people that aren't scared, they're not being brave, they're just doing what they do.
Yeah.
So in order for you to be brave and courageous, you have to be scared. This is the normal state of mind in order for you to get through that.
Yeah.
I want to change gears a little bit with something that has kind of been floating in my mind, and I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't experienced this because you went through a lot of really important life lessons early on. But did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome?
Yes. Actually, I think the answer is a little convoluted, right? Because the simple answer is yes, of course, I have. I think, but it's also a little bit of, when you grow up in the environment I did, we didn't have a house, we never had a car that worked. We never had, I never went on a vacation with my family ever growing up. We just didn't have what would, be not normal childhood things. And so there's a little bit of a world that exists that is so unfamiliar. You just don't know that you would ever be in that world because your only normal is this other
Mm.
world of food insecurity, financial insecurity,
Mm.
housing insecurity, and moving around, and that's your normal. And so
Mm.
just not and I think there's, I know there's a lot of research on this with people that grow up, people want to be comfortable. And so to get into this other world, you have to kind of navigate through a very uncomfortable time to kind of get there. And for me, it
Mm.
was education, exposure to my athletic career that kind of helped me build the confidence and realize that, getting to this other world could, there was a path there. Um, so I think there's a little bit of a imposter syndrome in that sense. There's also imposter syndrome. There's also kind of a healthy balance between I've never done that before. I don't know if I can do it versus I can't do it because I feel like an imposter. So I think there's a little bit of a balance, and it's hard to navigate when you've crossed over into imposter syndrome versus a healthy, acknowledgement that I just don't know if I can do it.
Mm.
And so I think I've had both. I think going back from my PhD, I definitely felt real imposter syndrome, thinking, I'd taken a 10-year break. Nobody in my family had ever done it. I had no path or example of how to get there, and feeling just like, you know, I am not meant to be here. I've also been at companies in leadership roles where, there's 18 of us in the room on a leadership team, and I'm the only female,
Mm,
and feeling, again, a little bit like an imposter, but also like,
mm,
why aren't there other women? And
mm,
realizing, when you think about it, and I think internalize it, you realize, it's a conscious effort to make sure that you have the right diversity, and the right skill sets in front of you. And whether or not I felt imposter syndrome or I felt just a little out of place,
mm.
I think there's a
I think
healthy
those
balance.
are, yeah, I think those are two different things, imposter
Yeah,
syndrome and being out of place. I think
yeah,
they feel the same, but I think they're different.
yeah. I
Yeah,
would agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
So a couple things that I was writing down. One is I don't think it's terrible to be an imposter. I think it's that fake it till you make it type of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and that kind of led me into the next thing, which is this concept of thriving. So there's this sweet spot in life where we can thrive. And if we're outside of that sweet spot, we can't thrive. One is when things are too easy. You can't thrive if things are too easy. You also can't thrive if things are too difficult and you're unable to achieve them. So there's this place that I think we should all try to find, which is that perfect balance, right? If we just talk about like, the gym, if I'm doing curls with 5 pounds, yeah, not a whole lot's going to happen, right? If I'm doing curls with 150 pounds, a lot's going to happen, just
Yeah.
not,
Exactly.
not good things, right?
Exactly.
So what's
Exactly.
so what's that balance? And I think it teaches. Now the nice thing about the 150 pound dumbbell or dumbbell is as soon as I pick it up, I know that that's going to be too much. I'm going to put it down,
Yeah.
right? So I would encourage people to pick up the 150 pound dumbbell, and if you realize, whoa, 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 I'm going to get injured, put it down.
Yeah.
But you should be putting yourself in a place where you can thrive, and you can't do that if things are too easy. We talked a lot about, it's funny how much leadership discussion we've had that's been unrelated to the workplace,
Yes.
right? And I think this is really refreshing. And then something that popped in my head, we're talking about leadership. Now, that means we're leading other people, right? And so this wasn't a focus when we started the podcast, but it kind of morphed into it,
Mhm.
which is as leaders, we're there to support our people. There is, I think, in the FDA group, we say there's no such thing as work-life balance, it's work-life blend.
Mhm.
You should be doing personal things during the workday, and you should be doing work things during your personal time because it's all blended together. There's no on and off switch, right? And obviously, there's different degrees, right? Like you shouldn't be working as much on vacation as you are here, and having as many cocktails during your workday as you would on vacation, right? But I think you kind of get the concept. But as leaders. I want to go to that point of the falling and the climbing,
Mhm.
which is we're there to support our people. And so when people are going through challenges in particular, it's a lot easier to support people as they climb, keep going, do your best, all that kind of stuff. But be there to support them on their fall. And I think one way that we can empathize is to try to figure out how far was that fall and try to understand what that meant to that person so that you can respond appropriately.
I think that's I'm thinking about that concept and trying to think of, actual examples that I've come across. I think, there's been a lot. I don't know if I've ever really thought about it from the perspective of how far did a person necessarily fall, but it's an interesting thought
Mm,
when you think about how we react, especially in a workplace environment, right?
Mm.
It's probably a lot more straightforward when you think about family members
Mm.
and things like that. But when you think about somebody in the workplace, they're still having those same feelings,
Right.
right? When something doesn't go as they planned it to, and what those consequences are, because sometimes they're quite significant, i.e., the fall, right? Because it could impact, a business, the revenue, a patient, and all of these different things. And I think it's something really to be cognizant of as we try to bring leaders back from a fall and find a path forward after they've experienced
Mm.
something like that. It's actually, it's something worth thinking about for sure.
Yeah. And when I talk about the work-life blend, right? How well is somebody going to perform as they're going through a divorce? How well is somebody going to perform as they've recently lost a loved one? How well is somebody going to perform because their significant other is in cancer treatment, right? And so I think that's why it's really important for us to understand anybody can do what they want. I think the connection of work life and personal life is a lot more intertwined than I think conventional wisdom would say. Because our personal lives, as much as we try to leave it at home and not bring it into the workplace, and vice versa,
Right,
that's not real, right?
right,
You have some influence over it, but not complete influence. And I think it's um, unreasonable to believe that you can do a clean split. So my
yeah,
point is, I think we have to be very sensitive to people's falling, and try to understand the level of impact that's going to have. Because I think when you can understand, empathize, and support people that are going through a fall, I'm trying to just put myself in a mental place of a speculative environment,
right,
right? My significant other is going through a cancer treatment, and one option is I get, no support or empathy, and one is I get a whole lot.
right,
Right. And how is that going to affect me? And we're looking at this through a leadership lens, which is, how are we going to optimize performance and company results and things like that? But it's funny because I actually have been talking about this recently. I spoke at DIA, and I said I used to go to conferences for two reasons, but now I go for four. So the two reasons I used to go was knowledge and business development. But now there's two more reasons that are equally as important. And one is personal connections with zero agenda.
yeah,
Just like this conversation is very enjoyable. And I'm not going to get anything out of it other than this enjoyment that I'm experiencing. So let's not always put the focus on the future, and let's say, hey, I'm really enjoying this, and so I think that's something that's important to me now when I go to conferences is I just having genuine connections for the sake of just having genuine connections, nothing else.
right.
The fourth thing that I really look forward to is inspirational stories. You've shared some. And I'll share the one of the plenary talks at the most recent conference I was at, where this guy started a company called Every Cure. He was a quarterback for Penn State. He was as handsome a man as you could possibly get. Had, a high school sweetheart, the whole thing. Was going to become a medical doctor. And then he had a rare disease called Castle syndrome. And there was no treatment. But what the treating physician did was put him on a cancer treatment and ended up saving his life. And the before and after of this guy, it was really heartbreaking. But he was able to overcome it. But here's the problem: is he kept relapsing. And
Uh,
every relapse with Castle syndrome, I think it put him in the hospital for 6 to 12 months. And he's trying to live his life. He's got a girlfriend. How long is she going to wait for me? I'm trying to get my medical doctorate. So anyway, he ends up graduating. Does well. There's no treatment, so I might as well develop it, right? So he ends up finding the treatment for his rare disease, um, which that was a big check. However, he didn't stop there because really what the problem was the system whereby patents end after 7 years. And so there's no incentive to look at alternative indications. So he created a solution toward that, which was a nonprofit that using AI can look at already commercialized medications in the United States with untreated diseases and try to see which ones have a likelihood of succeeding, and then let's focus on running those through trials.
Huh.
And so that's the fourth reason I go to
Right.
conferences is because when I was driving home, did I talk about a deal that I might get? Did I
Right.
talk about, you know, this really, esoteric thing that I learned? Or was I talking about that really inspirational story, right?
Mhm.
So let me get your reaction on that.
No, I think it's interesting you talk about conferences, right? Because I think as you were repeating the two, I was like, oh yeah, I would say those are good. And what are the other two? And then of course, I think I've often thought about the personal connection piece, not necessarily as a reason to go to conference, but I think um, you get so busy in your day job that you lose perspective on the importance of having networks and connections for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
Support being one of them.
Hmm.
um, you know, just having friendships with
Hmm.
like-minded people that are doing
Hmm.
very similar jobs. Um, Stories,
Hmm.
learning something about how you can navigate your own job and leadership style, and really just getting to know people and learning about these really cool inventive things that are going on. And I think you know one of the things that I would say I don't do well is really that networking piece. And I think consciously making a decision to do that is critically important. And I think, like I said, you get so hyper focused. And in my case, I always felt like I needed to be self-reliant to a fault, and independent to a fault, that I didn't reach out as much as I should have, and can and should. And I think it's good to conscientiously think about doing those and then making it a habit, because obviously the more you repeat it and do it, it just becomes then second nature the next time you go. And so
Hmm.
I think it's a really good um, idea for and something for people to think about when they are out in the world networking.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really enjoyable conversation. I really appreciate your insights and perspective and vulnerability. Before we close, for the people that have made it this far into the podcast, what would you like to leave them with?
Thanks, Nick. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. Like I said, I hope that, sharing some of these anecdotes and some of the vulnerabilities will help people and encourage people to think about and embrace their own stories. I hid behind mine for a long time and tried to make my life look a lot less
Hmm.
chaotic.
Hmm.
And then I, at one point, realized that chaos is what makes us who we are and makes us the leaders that we are. And so it's critically important that people talk about the things that aren't necessarily
Well,
listed
the
on your
overcoming through
resume.
the chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, there's a couple quotes that I will repeat because I think they're really fitting. One is, it's attributed to an African proverb, that smooth seas do not make skillful sailors.
Yeah.
And the second one is from Winston Churchill, who I'm actually writing or reading a book about currently. Fascinating guy. But success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And I
Mm.
think it's not just bouncing back to status quo. It's really about finding ways to be creative and thrive even in the face of adversity, that will help people become leaders, not necessarily by title, but by example,
Hmm.
right? And I think it'll lead to more fulfilling experiences.
Yeah. Awesome. Jessica, thank you very much again for joining me. For everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with a colleague or a leader who's passionate about building stronger, more inspired teams. Don't forget to subscribe at thefdagroup.com/podcast for new episodes, and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn for ongoing insights about leadership, culture, and workforce excellence. To dive deeper into these ideas, pick up a copy of my book, The Passionate Workforce, available wherever books are sold. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and keep building a passionate workforce.